Gina, who are you?
So when I think of who I am, and I think of roles first, that's probably the first thing that comes to mind. And so I'm an athlete, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, and a friend, and a family member. Um, but then I also am inclined to think about like, who am I at my core? And I
Yeah.
think when I
That's why I
think,
asked this question, by the way, to avoid job
yeah,
titles.
yeah. So like when I think about like, what do I bring into those relationships, right? I I took this from my martial arts experience. And so I think first I am a white belt. Um
Mm,
and in that regard, I'm somebody who is like always curious. Um I try and take the posture of a learner. Just feel like there's always something to learn in every single day, in every experience, in every interaction. Um, and so I take that posture, and then I sort of strive to also have a black belt mentality, which is
mm,
more of kind of like where I derive strength and discipline and perseverance and those kinds of things, and also just a profound reverence for life and
yeah.
you know, capacity and what we're able to do as human beings.
How did you come to this? I love this white belt, black belt kind of analogy. When I'm assuming you haven't always been like that. I mean, we evolve, of course, over life and so forth. But I'm wondering, yeah, when did you first come to, I guess, that realization that like that analogy or that worked well for you?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't as much of an aha moment as it was an evolution.
Sure.
Um, I studied martial arts for many years, and I was actually drawn to it early on in like my when I started diving into sports psychology, and I was really fascinated with martial arts and, just being able to demonstrate that kind of self-control and control of the mind and all of these things. And so, but I never actually was able to study it myself until like my adult years. Um, and then I really dove into mixed martial arts first, and then later on Taekwondo. And so it was through those studies and just through the evolution of my process and growing in the field of sports psychology, studying stoicism, studying a lot of different having a lot of exposure. I went to a Catholic university, but they did such a great job of exposing us to like world religions. That was one of my favorite classes that I took.
Mm,
And so we studied Hinduism and we studied Buddhism, and there's just so many profound lessons um in all of that, and I just kept coming back to this idea of like, don't think you have all the answers,
yeah.
and be curious and ask questions and, be open to learning. So it's really been much more of an evolution. I would say in the last couple of years, I've sort of refined it into like saying, oh, that's really a white belt mentality, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the black belt mentality. So, but my
Well,
first exposure to it, if I've to just go back, was I started out in mixed martial arts, and I had, like, completed a whole curriculum there and earned my black belt, and then I went to a taekwondo school because I really wanted to learn traditional taekwondo, and the first thing that the master of the school said to me is that, "You start here as a no belt." So that was even lower than a white belt.
yeah, yeah. Wow. Well, but what I love about it is and maybe this is just the season of life that I'm in as well, because I think I mentioned to you when we first spoke that I'm working on the next book, and it's all around this idea of being between selves. And there's always it's like there's you're here, and you're kind of oscillating between. And there's so many different analogies that are coming up through studying ancient teachers and so forth that like you nailed it. It's not it's very rarely only one kind of approach. It's a mix of it's sometimes several, but often in our minds, it's like black and white, but how do you find the balance there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I think that's been a big shift for me, like, in my adulting.
Sure.
Because I would say I was a very, much more of a black and white thinker as a young adolescent, and you're trying to make
Yeah.
sense of the world, right? That's a hard time for everybody. You're trying to figure out exactly, like who you are, what's important to you and why, all of these things. But, as I've adulted and I'm still adulting,
Yeah, aren't we all?
yeah, I really have been um much more open to embracing this idea of, you know what? It can be both
Yeah.
and very often it is, in our relationships, in our work, and, everything we do. And I think that's been a big shift for me also.
Yeah. Well, it just lightens really every situation when you can adopt that kind of perspective, right? It
Mhm.
just even just saying or hearing you say those words, like it's like a breath, in the body and the mind and so forth. I love it.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about sport psychology, which I know, of course, you've studied, and you also identify as a strength or mental strength coach, which
Mhm.
I really love, and we kind of geeked out a little bit about when we first met. But I wanted to ask you about your first teacher, your mother, when you were
Yeah.
13 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, my mom, it's interesting. I didn't, certainly didn't have this perspective then. But when I was, well, she was kind of sick most of my growing up. So really first when I was in 1st grade, she was diagnosed with Hodgkin's cancer. And then like a year and a half later, again diagnosed with Hodgkin's cancer. And then she was in remission for a while, until I was about 12 or 13 years old. So like 8th grade. And she was diagnosed again, and it had metastasized, and it was, really quite um quite serious. And
Yeah.
so not that the other times weren't serious, but it was, I think, much more of a grave situation. um but in any case, she while she was going through treatments, she had had a seizure, likely a reaction to, like, the chemotherapy that she was taking, and, like, probably a food, I think, is what we ended up figuring out. But it was such a traumatic experience for me, um, and I couldn't sleep, and I wouldn't let her sleep alone, so I slept with her for weeks and weeks on end. And, so one of these nights that I was sleeping with her, I was super, hyper vigilant, and every time she moved or, breathed differently, I was like, and so it was one of these nights, and I heard her kind of breathing in this really slow and methodic pattern, and I was like, "Mom, are you okay?" And she said to me, she's like, "Yeah." She said, I'm just doing some deep breathing." And she didn't use the word visualization. I don't remember. And she said, when I breathe like this, she's like, "I'm imagining the chemotherapy, the medicine as Pac-Man,
Mm,
like
yeah.
eating the ghosts, which were the cancer cells." And
Yeah.
so she really was my first teacher of visualization and the power of the breath. You know, and that was so not her language or anything that she wasn't, but
Sure.
she organically, did that and taught me that in that moment, and I will forever be grateful because it really helped me to kind of, you know, like, have some validity to that because
Yeah.
it's just so powerful, so.
Do you remember, I imagine many years down the road when it kind of all clicked for you? Like, what were you doing? What were you studying? Were you like, yeah, I've seen or heard this before. It's the Pac-Man.
Yeah, yeah, for the fact that I'm totally dating myself. Yeah, I do because it was actually, like, in that very first sports psych class I took this spring semester of my freshman year, and we started talking about visualization and imagery and, those things. Prior to that, my mom used to say to me, "Gina, you have to think about, like, what it is that you want and, be able to see that and be able to imagine it." But it didn't really click for me. All of that didn't really come together until I took that sports psych class. And, we were talking about athletes and how athletes use visualization and, how effective it can be. And even some studies that looked at, like, the brain and neuromuscular contractions when you visualize, like, all this stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, my mother actually does know what she's talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah,
Like
totally.
every other teenager. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and just for context, you were in sports psych having, been an athlete, and I mean, you still are an athlete, of course, but you were, playing quite competitively and I think struggling mentally
Yeah.
along that ride as well. Like, I think it's important to just share some of your context because there are, and I know you work with a lot of these athletes present day. I mean, there's still a lot of struggle out there that, you know, I, I don't want to say what we do on the mental strength and mental fitness side and sports psychology side is the end all be all, but it sure is a huge set of tools that I wish more people knew about.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think you and I were talking about this too. Like, this is all the stuff I wish I would have known. You know,
Yeah.
I, and that is, I think, one of the things that kind of drives my passion too, is because I did struggle so much, especially in high school, with just incredible performance anxiety, and concurrently an eating disorder that was going on. I was just really a hot mess. And my coaches at the time, nobody had this language. Nobody really did this. Mental fitness
No.
wasn't even a thing,
Yeah. Mental
and
health wasn't even a thing, really.
right. It's two very simple words, but it's like, my goodness. Um, so I think the biggest thing, what brought me to sports psychology was because I struggled so much as an athlete. Um, and I think I saw it initially, like, sports was initially a way to get closer to my dad because he was a big athlete, he was super competitive. And so I saw that as, like, an avenue to kind of be close to him and have something in common and so on. And then when I got into it, and the higher you go in competition, and it's I struggled so much, with my own performance anxiety, which just led to this deterioration of my, own self-esteem, and thinking there was something wrong with me, and literally not having any tools or any idea,
Yeah.
how to help myself. And so in the class that I took, the very first sports psych class, it was like such an aha moment of like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea that how what I was thinking and feeling could impact my physical performance." Like,
Hmm.
that was just such a foreign concept to me. But then also it was like the first taste of true hope that I had, because I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can do something about this. I don't
Yeah.
have to be a victim, or a passive recipient to, like, all these negative thoughts that are, slamming into my mind every day."
So I guess what happened next? Like, what started to work for you? And then, of course, we can get into I'd love to get into the topic of what you're seeing in the real world today with especially young athletes and
Yeah.
then, of course, what we can, hopefully do and help identify triggers. But,
Yeah.
sticking with your story, like what were some of the non-negotiables in that time in your life that were really helpful or I can't say it, transformational?
Yeah. Um, well, first thing I did was align myself very quickly to the professor that taught this
Yeah, yeah,
course, and I'm
exactly.
like, "I have to learn more." And she and I became close friends. She really was my first mentor. We To this day, we still keep in touch. Um, so that was the first thing, and then I just kind of dove headfirst into anything and everything that I could learn about sports psychology. And for me at the time, and again, this is going back a really long time, but it was, sort of identifying some goals and starting to work toward my goals. Learning to learning to breathe.
Mm,
I hadn't realized, that was it's so funny, but I hadn't realized up to that point. And I think because my childhood and adolescence was super stressful for me, that I was constantly breathing up here. I
mhm.
didn't know what it felt like to really take a deep breath. And that's something I learned in a Zen and yoga class. One credit class was an elective, and it kind
Yeah.
of aligned again with, like, I'm like, "Cool, sports psychology-ish," and, like, I'm gonna take that class. But that was life-changing for me, and I've been doing yoga and breath work ever since. So,
Yeah.
those 2 things, I would say, just starting to get some clarity on, my goals and what I wanted to do and this idea of like, this is what I want to do. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I want to do something in this field. Getting very, quickly aligned with that professor and who later became a friend and um yeah, and doing my own breath and yoga.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I can see the intersect right away. I mean, of course, when we set the direction, I mean, that's half the battle, but then you start layering on any practice that slows you down a little bit, kind of quiets the mind or blows out some mental clutter. And next thing you know, you start seeing or feeling some of those or not triggers, but the signs, like the breadcrumbs of like, oh, and typically those relate to the direction you set, right?
Yeah.
But most of us just don't we can't hear or feel those because our minds are just so jammed, and I say that not from a place of judgment, but just from a realistic perspective of there's a lot going on in the world all the time, that if we don't have some of these practices, there's a reason they've literally been around since the beginning of time,
Yeah.
right? Like, if we have some of those things, then we can at least, I think, just handle the circumstances that most of us live within, and it doesn't have to be this kind of chest breathing. I totally get, like, I caught myself earlier this week. I was like, oh man, I'm not breathing properly, and like I need to take a minute. I'm
Yeah.
going too fast, right? And just like reset. So yeah, thank
And I
you.
think you and I spoke too about the idea of like just the protective value and the protective quality of mental fitness tools. And at the very most basic fundamental um, piece of that, I think, is breathing, right?
Yeah,
Like it's just it's it's so simple that I think it just gets overlooked, you know?
yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, it's kind of funny. It's literally the thing that keeps us alive that,
I know.
we don't think about until it's not, happening properly or we're at the end, right? But
Yeah, exactly. Or people, it's funny. I've had athletes come into my office and be like, "I don't like that breathing stuff." I'm like, "Really? Because you're doing it all day, every
yeah,
day. Like,
exactly.
what exactly about the breathing thing is it that you don't like?" So,
That's hilarious.
yeah.
Okay, well, so let's keep pulling on that with the athletes that you work with and have experienced over the last many years. I guess, like, what are some of the big themes that you see come up over and over again where there are at least entry points and you can start speaking about, this kind of work? And I say that because, I mean, you and I spoke about this, but, for those listening, I think there's a little bit of a how can I say this? Maybe a preconceived notion that, especially in, like, elite sport or when you're at the top, that all of these athletes have like 1,000 different coaches for the mind and this. I mean, there are many coaches, I think, on the physical side, and you've got the shooting coach, you've got the mate, like, but there's actually not that much when it comes to the mind. You'd be kind of shocked. I mean, I think we're making progress, which is fantastic, but it's still a huge gap. I think out there in all athletics.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. You know, I think a lot of times the initial initially meeting an athlete, there are some common themes that folks will come in with. Confidence is probably the primary thing. It's kind of the blanket, the umbrella that people will throw out there. "Oh, I'm struggling with my confidence," or "I'm struggling to perform, well in a game. I perform really well in practice, but I don't perform well in a game." Um, the the other one I would say that is often less obvious that I try and give language to that often then really resonates with the athlete, is imposter syndrome,
Mm.
and that's certainly something that I have firsthand experience with, so I'm very comfortable talking with them about
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Um, and then the other one is would probably be that in other words, that gets people in the door is, like, performance anxiety. So they have some level of awareness of, like, this performance anxiety, that they have, but they don't know where it comes from. And all of it, I think when we get down to it, um, it's almost trying to think if I'm gonna give it a percentage, maybe I'd say like 80, 85%. It is truly confidence issues. Like, it's really about grounded confidence.
Yeah,
What truly is grounded confidence? And not mistaking that for always having the best performance of your life every single time you go out there. That's not what grounded confidence is.
yeah,
Um, you know, it but so I think it's all much of it is rooted in that particular piece. And yes,
yeah.
there are folks that come in and have challenges with present moment focus and, hey, I need to be able to let go of mistakes and get back, to the present moment and so on. But very often all that's still rooted in some level of confidence, some
Confidence,
breakdown
yeah.
in confidence.
Which is interesting because, I don't wanna generalize, but I imagine most people listening, and even myself included, I don't think you would intuitively think that that's because just thinking about what it takes to get to that level of, performance from an athlete standpoint, like, well, they must have all the confidence in the world, like, it's not easy to do that, but, um, as you're saying, I mean, that seems to be one of the big struggles, and then if you look outside of sport and obviously the world that I spend a lot of time in and most do in business and so forth, that shows up as well with
Mhm.
top level leaders and so forth. Even on the outside, it may look like it's not there, but I think there's an element inside us that we're questioning, right? So what do
Yeah.
you do, Gina? What do you like? What's been your approach to start breaking that down for people?
Yeah, well, first, I think it's really important to understand the difference between what is grounded confidence and what's naive confidence.
Hmm.
You know?
Talk to us.
Yeah. So, uh, to keep it really simple, I think, naive confidence is confidence that is really based at talent based, you
Mm,
know,
yeah.
based on kind of feel and I'm pretty good at this and I know how to do it. And so there's confidence that comes from that, which I think sometimes can be a great precursor, right? But grounded confidence is really much more it's evidence-based.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that there's evidence for why you should be confident. And it usually involves a long period of time, a lot of hard work, a lot of failure, a lot of mistakes. Like, it's not sexy. Like, grounded confidence, well, like, what gives you that body of evidence is not sexy. It's usually not Instagram worthy. Um,
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we start talking about and like looking for those places where you have done the work, or
Hmm.
maybe you need to do more work, And if it's something that you earn, um,
Yeah.
rather
Well, and
than
I think it's something
just
we need to
have.
we need reminders of it. To me,
Yeah,
when you say grounded confidence, I think of experience stacking in a way,
yeah,
and you look back at, gosh, like if I really look, even within a year, I mean, we all accomplish and work through some pretty wild stuff, and there's a lot to be celebrated there. And there was a point where you didn't make this team celebrated there, and got there. Like, don't forget, can't you
yeah,
do it here,
that's right.
right?
Yeah,
And I mean, just because it's not everyone's an athlete, obviously, listening to the show, but like I think of this in the business world as well. Like if you take on a big project, I mean, you've taken something else on where it felt scary and uncertain and so forth, and
right.
you work through that, right? It's
Mhm.
there's many different examples.
Yeah, and I think, when you're talking about elite athletes and, like you said, well, I wouldn't naturally think that elite athletes would struggle with that. I think a lot of times, it's not obvious. It's
Hmm.
not obvious that that's kind of the root. Like, sometimes I think performance issues can show up in a lot of different ways. Like, they can show up with attentional things, again, not paying attention to the right thing at the right time, whatever that looks like, right? Um, or really kind of struggling to let go of mistakes. Um, but the reality is if your grounded confidence is solid and that's your foundation, you're always kind of anchoring back to that, right?
Yeah.
It's always,
Yeah,
like, getting back to that, well, not to be cliche, but really sticking to the process, you know?
yeah,
What got you there to begin with? Um,
yeah,
we don't play sports for absolute certainty, right? There's variability in it. If we already knew who was gonna win, how many points were gonna be scored, who'd foul out, who'd do this, like, why play,
yeah, it's a good
you
point.
know? So we play for this element of uncertainty, but then we get upset when things don't go our way and, like, can throw our hands up and be like, "Oh, this is a huge failure," you know? And that's not like, I if we operate like that, then nobody grows, right? And
Yeah,
nobody develops and succeeds. So I've worked on personally, and I've struggled with this myself, but I've worked on personally just having a posture of curiosity. And
mhm,
when something doesn't go the way I want it to, looking at it, like stepping back from it and looking at it objectively. And I'll say to athletes I work with all the time, like, hey, put your coach's hat on. You're not the player, you're the coach. Step back for a second. Let's replay that. What do you notice? Like, what would you coach that person on?
yeah, such
What
a
is
good
there to
practice.
learn? Right. What went
Yeah,
well? There's always something that you
yeah.
did well. What needs work? And then how can you improve that?
Yeah. Well, and the language is always completely different, right? It's like in anything, if you're thinking about giving an advice to a friend, I mean, you're not typically using the same internal self-talk that you have or like that, where you're really hard on yourself. So
Yeah.
it's just such a great practice.
Yeah.
I guess what comes to mind, Gina, is when you're talking about, like how can you zoom out or suggesting people zoom out and see the higher level picture of everything. To me, that often I think of, like, you need the luxury of some training around self-awareness and, like, the pause, right, to do that, and this is where I see, like, I guess where I'm trying to figure out how do we get these tools into up and coming athletes and athletes like, let's just use the NBA as an example, but say you're newly drafted and you're coming into the team. Like, how do we get this kind of work proactively in? Because I see, and I think most would agree, I'm thinking of 2 examples specifically. There's LeBron James, where I've seen a video before where he's literally on the sidelines, I think before the game, eyes closed. He's doing some sort of breathwork sequence, probably a visualization. Like, the whole arena is basically taking video of this and so forth. So, I mean, just knowing that that's happening, you've gotta have a pretty dialed in mind and discipline to have a practice like that. And
Yeah.
then the other example, and I know obviously you've got links to the Chicago Bulls as well, but I think of that documentary with Phil Jackson
Mhm.
and how they really highlighted the meditation practice. And I wrote about this actually in my book when those players were all leaving, right, for various reasons and their contracts were up and so forth. And they had like that last practice which was purely mental fitness. I mean, he gave the greatest gift I think he could have given those players of releasing whatever kind of locked emotions and relationships they had, good or bad, to the team by, writing those down and putting them in tin can and kinda setting them on fire and releasing. I mean, it's so you see that at the highest level, but it still doesn't like, it's still not normal yet.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts? What do we do, Gina?
Yeah, gosh, that's a $1,000,000 question. Um, yeah, it it is kind of fascinating to me that, like, I sort of began this journey in 1992, and we're still having this conversation
I
as if,
know.
this is new stuff. And
Yeah.
and and it's funny because I the short answer is I don't know.
Sure.
I really don't, because I think you keep having these conversations, and I do think that there's like the dark side and the light side of social media and kind of the digital age that we all live in now. Um the light side, of course, being like now it, I think it's much more germane to have these conversations, and for
Yeah.
people to hear about breathing and breath work and mindfulness, and these are things that are starting to become more of our vernacular. Um, and I think what you do is you teach people the tools. In sports, I the one thing that I definitely am clear on is that it has to start from the top down. Like,
Yeah.
and it's probably, resonates with you as well because your organizational, mental fitness work. And I just feel like because when you think about it, athletes spend the most time with their coaches, with their trainers, with their peers and the other athletes. And if the coaches haven't bought into it and the coaches aren't selling it, that's also why the Chicago Bulls and their implementation of all of Phil Jackson's philosophies were so effective because it was Phil that was saying we
Yeah,
need to,
yeah,
so they were like, okay, you know.
yeah.
Um, and lo and behold, it was pretty impactful for I think a lot of those players. They would probably say that that was, super powerful for them and hopefully even took that, on with them beyond those teams.
Oh, for sure.
But I think it has to start from the top down.
Yeah. And I think I mean, the only thing I would add that I've been thinking about, I think it's like anything, I mean, it's sales in a way, and you've got to find the language for the
Mhm.
entry point
Yeah.
in around, right? Okay, what will the organization resonate with and try to make that link so that people then listen until people can experience the practice, because that's the nice thing about this. As soon as you feel it and start feeling the benefits, you're like, oh well, like I'm hooked in. It's like you're on the train because they're just by the very nature of these practices, you feel different, right?
Yes.
And I wonder, I mean, with especially with athletes, I mean, I almost wanna go in and just kinda say, like, "Okay, can we just for 30 seconds be, like, very real? Let's take your favorite top athlete that's been an idol for you. Let's look at that person. You know it's not a skill thing, that throws them off. We've all had examples where we've seen someone start to unravel, and it's usually their mind. Let's not go there, and let's make sure that let's talk about the tools now so that in 5 years, if you're in that situation, that's not you on TV,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't
Yeah.
know, but I don't know if that would resonate, but
Yeah, but no, I think you're onto something. The other thing that like keeps coming up in my mind is the idea of vulnerability. I think we have to like dismantle this idea that somehow talking about how you're feeling or what you're thinking or or doing some of the mental strength, mental fitness work is somehow admitting some sort of vulnerability,
yeah,
or that admitting some vulnerability is a bad thing. Like, I really do like Brene Brown's position on that of like, strength comes from vulnerability. Um, and I truly believe that. And so I think, sort of dismantling that, bias that vulnerability is somehow a bad thing and like I mean, I do hear this from professional athletes, a lot. They will seek my services outside of their organization, even though they have access to, probably better, better qualified,
sure.
people with more letters after their name and all of these things. But there's this sense that they don't want to be vulnerable with these folks that are attached to the organization because somehow it's going to come back to them and
Yeah,
impact their playing time or their next contract or I mean those are legitimate concerns.
yeah,
um so I really think we have to also do to your point about the sales, we have to do a better job with messaging and
yeah.
normalizing this stuff. I
Yeah, but I think also your point
important.
around, if it's organization wide, then you start to like I'm obviously don't have direct experience with Phil Jackson, but I would imagine, if he heard a player was getting help with something like that, to him he'd be like, "Oh, perfect. Like
Yeah,
that's what we want." Right? And
absolutely.
so forth. So it comes back to your point about having everyone on board, and maybe it's just, maybe it's just very individualized and personalized by team, and the more, then you start to have a bit of a ripple effect and be like, well, they're doing something interesting over there. The next thing you know, have another team like asking questions, and to your point, being curious. And what I like about this, and especially at high level athletes, I mean, there a lot of these athletes are idols and people that others look up to. So Like, the way that I look at it, if we can do that at that level and make a ripple effect and collectively all work together, then it really starts to impact the entire world in a way, right? Because so many people are looking up to these athletes.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of potential there for sure.
Yeah. Let's talk about I just wanna, being conscious of time, but I wanna talk about your practices present day and what are some of your non-negotiables? I mean, you're out there holding space for a lot of people that's can be, energetically draining at times, and, obviously, you need your mind to be sharp and to be tuned in and plugged in, so, I guess, yeah, what are some of your core practices, and are there any rituals or activities that, you would really like to try and haven't yet?
Yeah, I so my core practices, this is something I stole from Brian Johnson kind of hammering this home about the idea of having a solid AM and PM bookend. And
Yeah,
I think he would probably give credit to maybe James Clear with Atomic Habits. I think it might be from his work originally, but that really resonated with me. And so I have uh, part one of the core fundamental pieces of mental fitness, like you and I've talked about, is sleep.
yeah.
Um, and so it's this idea of like how you end your day will determine your next day, like
Mhm.
how tomorrow is going to go. It has a major impact. So I try to get pretty dialed in with my AM bookend and my PM bookend. Um,
What does
you know,
your PM bookend look like?
yeah, for my PM bookend, I stay away from I try and turn off digital stuff about an hour before I go to bed, create that separation. I have my usual routine stuff, wash my face, brush my teeth, which are
Yeah,
very important. If I don't do those things for some reason, which never happens, but like I can't go to bed without washing my face and
yeah,
brushing my teeth. So they're
yeah.
very integral parts of that. But for me it's the digital stuff off. I like to go to bed with prayer and breath work at night. And it's
Mm,
not really breath work, it's just deep breathing. So I kind of
okay.
say my prayers and then I do deep breathing and sometimes I'll do like just mindfulness,
Yeah,
really. Is just kind of connecting with like feeling the mattress on my back, feeling the pillow, like those kinds
yeah.
of things. And I have a very like my sleep latency is very, very quick.
It's quick. I
Mhm.
find it interesting. I mean, that core practice goes right back to your original teacher who taught you the deep breathing on the mattress.
Yeah, that's right. That's
That's
right. I never
pretty
thought of that.
impressive.
You're right.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, and it's what I love about all of it is, again, nothing wrong with what I'm about to suggest, but none of that requires, 7-day silent retreat or some
for
sort of
sure.
big, plunge somewhere for, somewhere halfway around the world. Again, these are all awesome experiences, but it's the consistency and it's the small things that, speaking of James Clear, who
Yeah,
has also been on the show. It's it's the stacking of the habits, right?
right,
And
right.
they become exponential, and
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be complicated, which is
Yeah,
nice.
and from his work, I think he does such a beautiful job of talking about, like, when you wanna install a habit, right? You make it obvious, you make it so simple you can't fail, and then celebrate the fact that you did what you said you can do, or
Yeah,
you did what you said you will do. And that is also at the root of grounded confidence, you know?
yeah,
So when you start to look at that, um, yeah, you can do that with everything, everything and anything. Um, and so, I mean, I am so much still in that process. Like, I don't have this all dialed in at all,
yeah.
you
You and me
know?
both.
Yeah. I mean, when my husband's back in town, he loves to have the TV on. I mean, it throws my whole game off. And my
Yeah,
my aura ring would tell you that I don't know what's going on in the middle of the night, but I'm not sleeping great. And I don't know why. I can't quite, figure that out or nail that down. But I strongly and firmly believe in controlling what you can control, and really sort of applying that. And my best bet at doing that is at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day.
yeah.
So I really try and focus on that. And then workouts. I mean, that's probably my core self-care activity
Sure.
is I've gotta get movement in every day.
What about your mental nutrition or your mental diet? What is that? I mean, I think like our physical diets too, that it evolves and changes over time and so forth. But as of present day, I mean, what works well for you?
Yeah, so, um this is an interesting topic because I think you and I were talking about it, framing out this idea of like mental fitness and what that really means to me. Um, I kind of put it in two different categories. So there's like your brain diet, and all the things that are good for your brain, like omega 3s and different supplements and all of those things. And I like to have those things pretty dialed in. But then the other part of that, which I think is equally as important, is your mind diet, and that I differentiate by looking at like, well, what is the information coming in? What are the
Yeah.
sources of the information? Um, are they, what where are you getting your news from? Who are your friends? Who are you surrounding yourself with? What kind of music are you listening to? That was another lesson I learned from my mother. Actually,
Mm,
yeah. I as a teenager, like, I was maybe 11, 12, I don't know, and nursing a broken heart and listening to every sad song I could find on the radio and,
y
like, just I had cassette tapes, and I was playing all this sad music in my room and, just kinda moping around, and my mom totally put me in my place, and she's like, if I hear one more sad song on that radio, she's like, "You're gonna be grounded." She's like,
yeah,
"That is doing nothing for your mental health, like, that it doesn't make you feel good." And she
yeah,
was so right, like, I
so
didn't wanna
true.
get in trouble, so I did what she told me to do. I didn't have any real faith or belief in what she was saying, but it actually did, it helped, and so I'm very aware of, like, what am I listening to every day?
Mhm.
Um, and music I think is so powerful.
Yeah, well, we all have that artist or that song or playlist that instantly can shift your state, right? It's just
Yeah.
I think you nailed it. Like, you have to pay attention and check in with yourself and notice when you fall into some sort of autopilot and slip in and all of a sudden because I think it's like very similar to our physical diet. It's we Once stress starts to come up, it's like you start eating like shit. It's like all
Yeah.
these weird things where it's like you're doing the exact opposite of what you should be doing, but for some reason, probably from a safety, psychology perspective, like that's comfort food or that's
Yeah.
comfort mental, like social media or whatever it is. And it's to your mom's point, I think it just keeps driving you further and further down the hole. And
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be like that. It
Yeah.
literally can shift that in seconds.
Yeah. It's so wild because I think, and I can totally geek out on this topic too, but I just think it's so fascinating because we do have another thing I hear in my practice a lot is like negative self-talk. I don't know why I'm constantly like have this negative voice inside my head. And I really try and normalize that for people because it was something I came to terms with for myself too, that, that negative bias is really it's from a place of our brain, primitive brain trying to help us survive, you know?
Yeah.
So we look through this negative lens of like threat assessment, where's the danger? What am I going to do? Like, how am I going to survive? And I always think about it in terms of like, our brain is the anatomical part of our body, right? And its
Yeah.
sole job is to keep us alive. It doesn't care if you're comfortable. It doesn't care if you feel confident. Doesn't care if you like, like
Yeah.
it's it's really just that anatomical system. But then our mind is what gives context and narrative in the story. And that story has an influence on that anatomical function, which I think is just so, like, fascinating, And
Yeah.
so even those moments, like, when we're super stressed out or we crave, something really crappy, I still think that's like that override of kinda survival, like, "Oh my gosh, there's danger, there's a threat, there's something, we need to do something to feel better or to get more energy," or right?
Yeah.
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 And so it's
But
not always
just knowing that.
healthy. Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the thing is, I mean, and this is, like, where the curiosity comes into play, right? Is if we keep asking the questions, keep learning, and have these perspectives as we go, and I think this is where the bookends come in as well. I mean, starting your day from I mean, who knows? You might wake up and something might you might be feel off or so forth, and I'm like you, I have typically have some sort of mental fitness or stoic philosophy kind of leaning against my coffee machine. You literally read one page and you're like, oh, you shift perspective right away, start the day feeling like you're on your own terms and that you've done something for your mind. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's all it takes. And other times you need to do that 15 times in the day. But I mean, that's
Yeah.
okay too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I like to think of those days when you have to do it over and over again as, like, opportunity for reps, right?
Yeah.
Like lifting a weight. You're just getting more reps in that day, you know?
Yeah. I
Um,
love it.
Instead of that feeling of like, "Oh my gosh, why do I keep thinking this way? Why do I?" And again, I have lived and I do sometimes live on the other side of that, of like, "Why can't I get this out of my head?" But then when I kinda recalibrate and say, "All right, this is just another opportunity to practice these skills," you
Yeah.
know? And today I'm getting a whole lot more opportunity.
Exactly. It's a
Yeah,
big practice day.
yeah, exactly. A big training day today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Gina, time has just flown by. I'm not surprised. I had a
Uh,
feeling this was gonna happen when we first met, and, I mean, who knows? We'll have to do maybe a round 2 or 3 and keep the conversation going, but for today, at least, I wanna, A, thank you for showing up and being here and being present and sharing some of your wisdom and insights with us, but then of course a higher thank you for just the work that you do day in and day out, because it's not easy, and you're a human too. Like you're saying, you're going through things as well, which I think is even better for anyone that's coaching someone else. I mean, there has to be some sort of relatability, but it's hard. So
yeah.
I want to thank you for showing up, because your impact then of course ripples across, individuals and teams and societies, frankly, and you can't even measure that. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me.